as someone who, as a telco journalist, you sort of feel that you straddle the content and the telecoms world.
Do you know what I think it is? It's just they like the idea of being in that market because it's sexy.
I think they like it.
It's
something else.
Yeah.
But I think the rationale is... I think that a big part of the rationale is this constant, perfectly justifiable fear of commoditization, of being a utility. Yeah. So here we are, we're just a fucking dumb pipe.
Let's put something through the pipe.
Yeah, that way.
Exactly.
Let's have some control of that. It's like a water company owning the water as well. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast, third from the studio. Let's see how that goes, Pierre. Because
it's going to be fine.
You've been upsetting the people who run the building by taking the wrong lift. So let's see how that goes. But hopefully we'll be able to keep doing it. We nearly didn't do it today because yesterday I felt like shit because I had my COVID vaccine on AstraZeneca on Wednesday. And I felt a little bit sort of woozy as soon as it happened. But then I was all right. And then I woke up about 5 a.m. on Thursday. I was like, oh dear. And started caning the paracetamol.
No, please say how many grams total?
Well, each time you take 2 pills, which is a gram in total, 2 500 milligram ones. And I had that every 4 hours. So I had about 5 grams over the course of the day. And I still felt like shit. So there we go.
By the end of the day, it was a paracetamol, not the...
Yeah. Looks like kind of paracetamol hallucination. Everything turned into a little white pill. And then I was like, all right, okay, one more, see me off. And I sort of slept all right, still woke up about 5 or 6. But I was feeling a bit ropey. I was like, God, am I going to have to get in touch with the lads and say this isn't going to happen? But then by about 10, I was sort of all right.
After the bottle of paracetamol?
After I did have paracetamol at 8, but got to midday, I hadn't had any other paracetamol. I didn't feel rubbish, so... So yeah, I think...
And now you have the best medicine of all.
And now I've got grown-up paracetamol.
Sponsored by...
Actually, we got a bit of both. We got a bit of Jameson's as well. Which is sometimes when me and Ian go for a while, like, it's really hard to get a seat in any of the outside pub situations.
Yeah,
everyone's out now. And so then we end up just hanging out on the South Bank. The thing is, there's no bogs. So you don't want to be downing loads of beers.
Have to keep coming back here.
So that's why we bought a bottle of Jameson's. And then you didn't have a bag, so I took what we didn't drink home, and I thought I'd bring it now. Just as well, because pass me your can.
Well, BT finished off our beers, didn't they?
Yes, that's right. Ian thought I'll buy some beers, and he didn't realise he bought AF, which doesn't mean punk as fuck. It means punk alcohol free, which is a bit of a schoolboy error.
I just saw punk.
Yeah,
it tastes all right, actually, honestly.
As far as alcohol-free beers go, it's not bad.
So it's a good thing I brought the Jameson's back.
It is.
Otherwise you'd be disastrously sober for this pod.
Yeah,
and you can't talk expertly about telecoms without having a couple of drinks.
No,
right?
not when you've been in the industry for 20 years.
Exactly. So yes. So on that note, what are we going to chat about? We're going to start. It's more quarterlies. There's a ton of quarterlies this week, but in a telecoms context, the most relevant one's Nokia. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about them, but there's some others. There's like Huawei, which gave it one data point sort of thing.
4 paragraphs, I think.
Yeah, and makes a real virtue out of it. Mm-hmm. I think you covered ZTE, and just today I covered the big US tech companies, which are just making
ZTE was even less than Huawei, I think.
Oh, even less.
Well, they did actually have numbers, but they didn't say anything about them.
It's just like right, yeah. So we'll talk about that, and then we're going to move on to... We can talk about operators and content. Mm-hmm. So a couple of stories. Probably the bigger one this week was that BT's thinking of flogging its sport interests, or at least some of them.
Yeah.
The actual BT Sport? Really?
Yeah.
Champions League?
Yeah, just whatever it's got. Whatever it's ridiculously overpaid for.
Oh.
To Amazon or Disney or...
Oh, that's
I
me.
had ITV as well.
That's me resigning my BT broadband contract.
Right. Yeah.
Really? Oh, yeah. I don't...
That's
yeah.
the
Is that the only reason you have it?
So you can watch Arsenal beat.
I would love to have 5G
broadband.
broadband, but it's not in my area yet.
And then there's also Verizon's thinking of backing out of deals that no one could ever have imagined would have been bad when it bought 80s and bought 90s internet brands.
Bought the 90s. Yeah. Bought into the 90s.
So we can talk about the relative cunningness of operators getting into content, I think. And then we're going to finish off talking about space, specifically low Earth orbit satellites, which are being lobbed up in their thousands. And we're going to talk about who the players are and why, if at all, we should care.
Are they going to get in the way of people flying to Mars eventually?
That's a good point. There's
I always think like the space junk must be insane now.
some sort of coordinate. Well, that's an issue. That's an issue. And I can talk. Actually, I wrote about one company and their main spin doctor dissed me in the comments.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. So that'll be quite a funny thing to talk about.
Right.
So yes, there we are. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site, you can also watch it on YouTube and Facebook, and listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, loads of other podcasting platforms. Pierre, were you going to say who our most listened to thing?
Oh,
in fact,
yes.
last week you were going to talk about a milestone as well. Did you talk about that? Or did we forget?
No. This milestone we will cross eventually in the next few weeks. But we're not there yet.
You were anticipating it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, the city of the month is actually just London.
Is
with
it?
a close second of Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
How bizarre.
Yeah, no.
Because these places suddenly crop up. I mean, I definitely haven't written about Columbus, Ohio.
No,
or
must
Ohio
have.
at all.
It's
There must
like
be some kind of tech.
our audience is like 40% British, 40% American.
Is it?
And
40%
20%
American?
everything else.
I didn't even know we were 40%
Yeah.
Americans. Hello, America. And sometimes I'm not very kind about America, and yet you forgive me. Thank
It's
you.
tough love.
Where's number 3? India.
No, it's like a mix of everything.
Right.
Germany, Sweden,
Well,
up there.
Australia comes up every now and then. doesn't it?
Australia, yeah.
Yeah, presumably people who can understand shit comes out of our mouth would help.
That helps, yeah.
Yeah, presumably like Nordics when we talk about them, as we're about to. A good segue. So it's still quarterly season. And we had Nokia's, which I've got to be honest, covering Nokia's quarterlies in the last year or two, it's been a bit of a depressing affair, hasn't it? Because they've normally been a bit shit. Not catastrophic, just like...
Well, they've been loss-making.
they've been loss-making, and they've always been going, yeah, don't worry, we're about to sort it out.
Yeah.
And they've
And
been
losing
saying that for
market
years.
share and, all sorts of other things.
And apologising for just dropping the ball on chips and all that sort of thing. But I'll hand it to you. That wasn't the tone this time, was it?
No. I got on the call with a few other reporters with the CEO in the morning. And
Pekka.
Pekka Lundmark, and there was a real spring in his step.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big smile on his face.
His pecker was up. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
And and then I think when the markets opened, their share price went up about 12% immediately.
Yeah.
And it was all. I mean, it was a really good set of results. In fact, I sort of had a look past the back earnings, and they haven't had as strong a quarter in terms of sales growth on a like-for-like basis, sort of constant currency, for 6 years. So I think it was up 9%. I mean, the reported figure was only 3%, but
Adjusted for adjustments.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But even that,
I hate that at quarterly season because some people. I was just having a look. We'll come to it later, but I was just summarising the big US tech companies.
Yeah.
And some of them do like GAAP and non-GAAP.
Yes, that's even more confusing.
And I don't know which one.
Yeah, I know.
I have to go and see what
struggle with that
Bloomberg's
as well.
done or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, at least with the European firms, it tends to be here's a reported figure and here's constant currency. And I think I mean, they can't. The currency movements is out of their control. So I always think that the organic stuff is a good reflection of where things stand. And to have 9% growth is really good. I mean, as I say, it's not been close to that for a long time. There's been declines recently. And if you look at the detail, I mean, a lot of it's actually driven by the this new network infrastructure business, which does things like optical networks and the fixed broadband stuff.
The audience might remember last week I said one of the only times you and I chat apart from this environment and then going for a beer after is when I sort of am confronted with not really knowing what the fuck I'm talking about. And I call on you, as you clearly know what you're talking about more than I do. Not that that's any great compliment. And,
I didn't know what I was talking about.
But that's part of it. It's me just saying if Ian's not 100% sure, then I don't feel too exposed on
Well, it's the
stuff.
distinction between IP and optical that you're...
Yeah, that's it. And then I went and did actually what I should have done instead of bothering you and just went and fucking did my own research. and so they've got 4 bits. They split.
Well, it's fixed IP, optical, and something else.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say it, wasn't I?
Yeah, but I can't remember what the other one is. So
I was about to say what the 4 bits were, and you interrupted to say that you don't know what all the 4 bits are. That's what just happened.
I know 3 of them.
You've got submarine.
Submarine, yes.
So yes, and I was like, okay, there's optical and there's fixed. Well, isn't that the same? It's all fibre. And then IP networks, isn't that all fibre? Aren't all 3 of them fibre? I thought. Submarine, at least I can understand. That's like a geographical thing. If it's like submarine, underground, over the air, and something like that, then I could, I can.
It's not necessarily fibre.
Well, no, I guess not.
Yeah.
But that was my initial thinking, which led for my panicked instant message to you. And then, so as you correctly told me at the time, fixed is like sort of access.
Yeah.
So it's the fibre that goes to homes and businesses, FTTP.
Yeah, as well as older copper-based products as well.
Right, yeah, fair point. And then optical presumably is fibre, as is strongly implied in the name.
Yeah,
and that's more.
It is, but it's more for the transport stuff.
Transport, like backhaul and core sort of thing.
Yeah, it's stuff like multiplexing products and stuff that you have.
That's not helping. That sounds like a cinema.
It's still boxes. It's not like they're actually sort of selling the cable itself.
Yes, because that's someone else. That's like
it's kind of boxes that are used
at either end
in the transport side of things, rather than in the last mile.
Right, and then IP networks, I looked it up, and there's all talk of routers and switches, which just made me think of Cisco.
But it's more to do with, you can have optical and IP, and there's an overlap between them.
That's not helpful, is it?
I mean, IP is like packet switching rather than circuit switching, basically. So,
I'm getting out of depth.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Packet switching is like the language of the internet, as opposed to doing
the internet protocol, hence IP networks.
Yeah. But anyway, the whole thing basically did really well. I think it was up like a 5th or something.
Yeah, so that was what I focused on in my coverage. It was 28% increase in revenues from network infrastructure business. Yeah. And within that, the big winner was fixed networks. So it was this access network stuff.
Yeah.
So clearly, there's a lot of fibre rollout going on. I would guess from that. Is that a fair?
There's a lot going out on in China. And there's quite a lot going. I mean, that was a big growth area. So you look at their regional breakdown, and they did really well in China, which is a little bit counterintuitive.
They did all right, yes.
Given that they lost out last year massively when they sort of lost any 5G radio work, but they've done a lot of good stuff on the fixed side, basically in China. They also called out India as a market where they've done quite well. I think there's a lot of European operators that are still rolling out fibre products, and I guess during
the UK, it's not like it's ubiquitous. Is it?
So Nokia, that's a classic example. Nokia is like a big supplier to OpenReach.
Right.
They're.
Sorry.
I don't know how much of an impact. I mean, I wrote about this a few months ago, that the whole sort of Huawei thing has had. I tend to think Huawei's been a bit overlooked on the fixed side. And
we've made that point very well before.
And but certainly in the UK, there is a restriction on what they can do with Huawei on the fixed side, and it might even get tightened up. So. But there's just other markets, I suppose, in the pandemic, with people relying on fixed networks a lot more, and companies having to, strengthen the transport side of things and make sure they've got enough capacity there for all these people working at home and studying at home and doing whatever. Then it kind of plays their hands, and they're in a really strong. I mean, you look at, everybody talks about this dominant position that 3 companies have in the radio access market, but you look at fixed broadband, and look at some of these fixed line sectors, and it's skewed just as much. It's very heavily skewed towards a couple of providers, the big ones being Huawei and Nokia. And even if Huawei is not restricted on the fixed line side in the way that it is in 5G, I still think, operators at the moment are probably wary of doing deals. Yeah. So it kind of plays to Nokia's advantage. And they've always been really highly regarded in that area. I mean, if you were going to be taking over in this big restructuring that Pekka's been doing for one of these new divisions, the one that is almost like, put your feet up on the table and just let the guys get on with it, has to be that network infrastructure part.
Well, yes, and and maybe, I don't know if I was oversimplifying it, but I sort of editorialised it as a sort of belated vindication of the Alcatel-Lucent acquisition.
Well, I don't know if it's belated, because that has always been a strong thing for them.
But the actual move just never seemed to turn into. So is our point that that bit was always fine. It just distracted them so much on mobile that was why it took ages for the move to pay off.
I mean, it's still not as big as the big. I think it's something like 45% or 46%, maybe even more. Though it's around about that much that comes from mobile access of their revenues. And I think when they had all those units in one division, it made it look even more like mobile was, that's where all the money is, and then everything else is broken out underneath. Those 4 bits you've just named, which just seem a lot smaller. Now in aggregate, they're quite big, and they've done quite well in the past. And I guess that's why Nokia's results haven't been, when it's had problems with mobile, it's always had that sort of Alcatel-Lucent stuff that it acquired to kind of rely on.
Steady.
It's been steady.
As you say, there isn't that much choice.
It has been, definitely. I think, there's just a lot of activity in the market at the moment. But the other thing is, mobile did see a turnaround this quarter, I think. I think it's fair to say. I mean, if you look at the organic growth rate, I think for mobile access, it was about 3%. Yeah. And if you look back at what happened in the first quarter of last year, it was down 2%. So that's quite a big swing. And I think it's, they've been talking a lot recently about what they're trying to do to sort out these chip problems, and it's starting to feed through. You can see the gross margins going up as they get rid of these costlier components that they were using and introduce the kind of stuff that they're doing part in-house, and that's more like what Ericsson and Huawei have been doing, and it makes them more competitive. It puts them in a much better position to compete in the market for 5G at a time when 5G's becoming, he said this year's kind of the inflection point for 5G, Pekka Lundmark. It's the year when sales will be bigger than 4G sales. So for them to be getting it sorted out is a good time.
Well, and also like the R&D spend, that was what I said in my conclusion. So there seems to be better margin from the network infrastructure. And
Definitely.
then they've got the not to confuse different types of IP, but the intellectual property bit, Nokia Technologies, which isn't a huge revenue, but it's nearly all
Very
fucking
profitable.
profit, isn't it? Because it's just patents that, granted, I mean, it's, I remember covering it when I was a smartphone analyst. I remember comparing the R&D spend of Nokia back when it was a big smartphone player, back when it was the biggest.
Yeah.
So like 10 plus years ago. And its R&D spend was like 5 times Apple's.
Right.
And the reason it came up was like, how come Apple's kicking your ass? And because they were just chucking it around left, right and centre. But on the back of that, they have got a shitload of intellectual property.
Yes.
And so,
in fact, I think there was another one of those studies, wasn't there, this week, saying that they're...
Oh, yeah, the most patents.
Yeah. Although talking to the company that did that PA consulting, interestingly, I talked to somebody in the industry, and you might know who I'm referring to, on the phone, and didn't want to be named, but they're very much in the thick of the whole sort of patents. And,
right, I can have a guess.
And he said that, and also not Nokia, and he said that PA Consulting do a better job than anybody of doing doing those particular studies, which is interesting. They're the ones who've called out Nokia, and we've seen a lot of the ones in the past sort of saying Huawei's at the top of the list. But
yes, okay.
But basically,
I mean, it could be, sometimes
could be that Nokia's paid heavily for PA Consulting's research, but
or it could just be that people recommending them are happy with the outcome rather than that necessarily
we don't
being
know, do we?
An endorsement of their methodology.
Yeah.
But whatever. So yes. So the reason I mention that is if those 2 bits of the company are doing well and they're profitable, then they can cross-subsidise mobile.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons Nokia's fallen behind is it's being outspent on R&D.
Yeah.
Now, Huawei keeps defiantly going, well, we're going to spend through the arse on R&D no matter what the Yanks do. Ericsson's whole revival has been on sacking everyone and spending the cash they save on R&D.
And that's basically what Nokia is now doing.
It's basically just one bloke and a sort of aircraft
but this is
hangar for the
move
boffins.
is now happening in Finland as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But it helps if you've got some margin somewhere in the business, because that money's got to come from somewhere.
And it helps to be net profitable, which they haven't been for a while. I think they swung to a net profit. And it's a couple of things. It's like you say, it's the patents business just being all sort of pure profit. It's improving margins at the mobile business now that they're sort of phasing out these costlier products, and it's the cost-cutting program. So they've, a couple of years ago they had 103,000 employees. They're now down to something like 90, I think, and they're trying to get down to sort of 80 to 85 in the next 2 years.
It feels we've both said it before. It definitely feels like Ericsson felt a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember when Ericsson first started posting better results, we were like, okay, let's not break out the aquavit yet. but this is looking promising. And then it's been sort of relentlessly, not very exciting. I think we said it in last week, didn't we? Boringly steady progress.
Yeah.
But that's how you like it, and that's how investors like it.
Yep.
I think my tenner is now up to about £9 in Nokia. Actually, do you know? I think I've always been selling Nokia short. It's not like it ever went down 25%.
No.
I think I probably lost £1, and now I'm only 50p down. Let's put it that way.
But the other thing with Nokia, of course, is the backlash against Huawei, which is
which they'll never directly reference.
I still think I still, even though they're working hard to correct this problem that they've had in 5G, and certainly that's feeding through, and you can even see that in the results on the gross margins. I still think there's a perception that they're probably in radio access. They're probably the sort of number 3 player, in terms of their competitiveness at the moment. It's Ericsson, it's Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia kind of thing, or Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia.
Yeah,
but
that'll probably always remain the case as long as China keeps.
Well, I don't know if it always will. I mean, Tommy Uito, who's the guy who's head of mobile access, is very keen to make out that back in the days of 4G, Nokia was regarded as the real quality player. If you wanted top-notch products, that was,
But I seem to remember. Do you remember like Nokia, Siemens, and all that? They always seem to be having a nightmare on their numbers. But maybe they were just
the same issues as they've had with I think it's just merger problems. And,
right. So the quality of their gear was always up to scratch. They were just fucking the accounts up a bit. I think the quality's
always been very, very high, and I think they've stumbled in 5G because of a few things that we've talked about lots before, and they're sorting that out. But at the moment, I think one of the reasons that you're seeing an improvement in, certainly on the sales side, is this. Is this sort of backlash against Huawei, which has been going on for a while, but I think it's just starting to feed through really now with companies doing. So classic example is the UK where we are. BT used to use Huawei and less Nokia in its network, sort of 2/3 Huawei, 1/3 Nokia, and is now kind of recalibrating to bring Ericsson on board and beef up Nokia's position. And, Nokia's picked up work in other European markets, as has Ericsson, and they can boast some sort of market share gains in the region thanks to that. They've had a couple of big setbacks. That's the thing. They've had this upset in China, obviously, where they wanted to play because it's such a big market. So even if you get a tiny share, you're still making a lot of money. And they had a big upset in North America with Verizon,
yet their North American numbers, and maybe this was mainly on fixed line stuff, but their North American numbers were pretty decent this quarter, weren't they?
Exactly, and he said that. He was asked about North America, and he said, well, you've got to remember that, even though we're not doing the 5G stuff with Verizon, we sell a lot of other things to them, and there's a lot of activity there. And they're with the other networks. It's not just Verizon in that market, obviously. There's 2 other big players that I think are using Nokia, unless I'm mistaken. I think they are using Nokia. So
Verizon, Hans Vespa just be like, I'm not using Nokia.
Yeah, so it's a big loss, obviously, and it's had an impact on the numbers, but I think they're turning it around, and it's the best. It is probably the best mobile quarter they've had for quite a long time.
Fair enough. So I dwelt almost entirely on the fixed, but that's because that was yesterday, and you were lucky you got anything out of me yesterday, if I'm honest. So I found an angle. I thought that'll do me.
Yeah, I mean the fixed was a big story. It's a big growth story.
Okay. Cool. I mean, I'm going to move on from that just because there's lots of other quarterly stuff going on. Before I get onto big tech, the Chinese vendors have offered some kind of numbers.
Not much, but
so I think I covered Huawei's ones, but you tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I found it. There's not, as you say, there's not much detail. There's 4 paragraphs, but I found it interesting just because it's. I think Bloomberg was reporting actually when they covered their, when they covered the annual results, that the fourth quarter of that year was a dip for the first time in ages. But I never saw a specific release from them about Q4. Right. So it was almost like Bloomberg got sight of something or talked to somebody that revealed that information. But this was the first clear example.
People with knowledge of the matter.
Yeah, this is the first clear example I could see from Huawei that revenues have gone down, and they've gone down quite a lot. It's 16%, I think, was the drop. Now, a lot of that will obviously be because they sold the Honor smartphone business. This is a reported figure; it's not organic. But at the same time, there's quite a lot of pain showing up on the phone side generally. I mean, you cover this more than I do, don't you? The Counterpoint numbers and Strategy Analytics and all those guys. The market share seems, from what I looked at, to have dropped.
And even
a lot.
in China,
right?
So so the problem is, they flogged Honor. So there's a sort of year-on-year and sequential thing there. but I think that most of their sales were still Huawei branded, certainly at the premium end.
Yep.
And yes, there was I think some counterpoint numbers just showing that Oppo and Vivo. Do you know, actually, I didn't know this. So there's Oppo, there's Vivo, there's in the UK you can get OnePlus. There's another brand that's just doing well called Realme.
Right.
And they're all fucking owned by the same company.
Really?
BKK.
Even Oppo and Vivo.
I thought
Oppo and Vivo owned by the same company.
I never knew
BKK
that.
it's called.
I thought OnePlus was Taiwanese.
Nah, that's an offshoot of Oppo.
No, I didn't know that. I thought Oppo and Vivo
Are you
were.
sure?
Well, they're all
How
owned.
dare you,
aren't
sir.
they all owned by Xi Jinping?
Indirectly. Well, they certainly aren't coming out with a phone called the Winnie the Pooh phone.
Oh,
put
no,
it that
sorry.
way.
I got it confused with...
I'm definitely not going to China now.
No.
But yeah,
they're all based in Shenzhen, yeah.
Yeah.
or just up the road. I think Guangzhou, something like that.
Guangzhou, yeah, it's on the big tech centre, I think, isn't
which
it?
is just up the road from Shenzhen. I think.
But they, I mean, that was the real pain point, was the consumer business.
BKK Electronics.
I thought the funny thing in their earnings statement was this, if you can call it an earnings statement in their release, was this thing about the networks business's continued steady growth or something, because last year it grew by 0.2%.
Yeah.
And if you go back
Well,
a
that's
few
your
years,
classic
it was growing by about 20 or
euphemistic bullshit,
30%.
isn't it?
So what does that mean? I mean, I doubt it's had a turnaround all of a sudden in the first quarter.
And then the other thing I noticed, so yes, that was well observed by you. The other thing I noticed is they didn't mention enterprise. So they got three main segments.
Yep.
They're, by far their two biggest are networks and consumer.
Yep.
Consumer's having a mare, and that's fine. I mean, it's not like they haven't got an excuse. But then they're not a public company. They don't really need an excuse. It's not like they've got to explain themselves to shareholders, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
But they feel the need to explain themselves to the outside world, which is why, I mean, they don't even need to give us the shitty amount of data they give us, do they?
No.
So I guess
That's their effort to be transparent.
Yeah,
and
well,
try
we shouldn't
and-
moan, but then we shouldn't also be excessively grateful.
No.
And they still brought in, like, converting into dollars, about $24 billion.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're doing all right, and their margins are still all right. They were talking about maintaining their margins because they've done the usual sack everyone routine.
I mean, we can look at that figure that they published in the 2020 annual report about how much comes from China these days. It's about 2/3, is it? I think it's about 2/3 of revenue now
But I
comes
tell you
from
what,
China.
but their smartphone, so
even if that suffered, then a lot of it, I suppose, points to growth on the network side in China, which we knew was going on.
It must be, mustn't it? Because looking at these counterpoint numbers, they just no, that's Europe. I've lost it. I've done it again. I've lost the story. I've lost the news. But yes, I know that they're now a distant third behind Oppo and Vivo.
Right.
Which is so basically, there's only three main Chinese vendors. If you think about it, if you discount ZTE, you can't really be asked anymore.
What, in phones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Huawei.
Yeah.
There's all the ones owned by BKK, which is Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, Realme, and then there's Xiaomi.
Show me the money.
Xiaomi the money. So
They're not
that's
owned
it
by
really.
BKK.
And BKK, which sounds more like a barbecue brand or something for me. Yeah, sort of a brand of charcoal or something like that. But there we go. But they're really kicking ass. I mean, you see Oppo everywhere. If you go on operator sites in the UK, there's Oppo everywhere and OnePlus.
Well, they're
I just bought
sponsoring all sorts of things
I
now.
bought my daughter a OnePlus.
OnePlus make really good phones.
Yeah, and it was really marked down because it was like the generation before when they were just launching a new one.
Yeah.
And it was really marked down. It was like, I don't know, 300 quid or something for a fucking top end phone.
Yeah.
There was nicely reviewed. I don't know so much about Oppo.
Yeah, well, it was more or less the same
My
thing.
mum got a Huawei one recently.
Okay.
I had to upgrade her, and she liked the look of that one. And she had
Really?
a Huawei
Was that
one.
wise?
Well, my dad was standing in the background going, Chinese spying, Chinese
Well, it's
spying.
not just.
but-
It's not that. I mean, the reason Huawei's numbers are going off a cliff
Android, yeah.
is well, that's the big one. You know, it's I think still quite underreported. Probably not by the geek press.
Yeah.
But you know, if you can't get full fat Android,
Yeah. Well, she couldn't be persuaded.
no. Well, maybe your mum. You know, I don't want to categorise
And
your
to be
mum as
quite
an
honest,
old biddy,
she's-
but maybe
Yeah,
maybe
she's not
her
biddy.
her requirements are not too exacting.
I think she just wants. I mean, these days you can't buy one of those old phones that just does text messaging and phone calls,
Yes.
can you? So,
Well, you can, Doro. But
Right.
that's the most insulting thing. If you go to an old person and go, get a Doro phone, got nice big numbers.
No, yeah, she'd balk at that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's a nice.
That's
looking
just an
phone. I think she
admission
wanted a
that
good
you're
camera
on
as
your
well,
way out
so-
buying a Doro phone, isn't it? Sorry, Doro.
I mean, going back to Huawei, I think like you say, the surprising thing was not any mention of enterprise, considering that
Yes.
had been the high flyer in 2020. So I don't know what that means, whether we should read anything into them not saying anything about enterprise, but it's certainly a lot smaller than the other two divisions, but it was way up, I think, 2020 results. And that's the one they've been talking a lot about, all this talk, all this discussion about expanding more into software and IT and
Yeah,
trying
and
to
they
do
just
things in
launched a bunch of
sectors.
cloud stuff this week.
Yeah. Exactly. They have. Yes.
It was weird. You're right. It's weird. And you see, this is the problem with this. Yeah, it sounds a bit sort of xenophobic, but it's accurate. This is quite a Chinese approach to sort of semi-transparency. We're going to pretend to be transparent, but only tell you some stuff. Problem with that is, and I've had this conversation. In fact, I've had this conversation with Huawei's PR people. Do you remember I mentioned a few weeks ago? We were talking about their numbers and how they'd still managed to maintain a really great sort of margin in spite of everything.
Yeah.
And then I just looked in what they published, that stuff that was properly audited.
Yeah.
And I saw that they paid half the tax they did the previous year. And I didn't even editorialise that. I went, well, that's one way to keep your margins up. And Huawei's sort of PR people were a bit like, what are you trying to say? And you could tell they were a little bit like, all right, Scott.
Yeah.
And I just said, look, if you're gonna, because the thing is, they didn't annotate it. There's this halving of tax, and I'm sure there's perfectly good reasons for it. But then they didn't explain it. If they just had a little asterisk going, we pay half the tax because we wrote off some shit that got
Well,
blown
and then
up.
when they complained to you, they didn't explain it either. So
Yeah, well, quite. And so this is back to this thing. Now they've gone and been semi-transparent and told us some numbers, but left some out.
yeah.
So that makes us speculate. And of course, you're always going to speculate that if they don't say something, there must be something broken.
Well, I think my Huawei pieces are usually just sort of 50% speculation, and
Well,
I do a lot
yes.
of speculating in stories anyway. But
Me too.
but there's a lot of speculation.
It's a laugh.
There's a lot more speculation with Huawei stories,
Yeah.
and actually the net income was up even more, I think, wasn't it this time? I mean, part of that was because they had this big patents payment, which they
Right.
haven't
Yes.
had before, because they've started charging for the royalties in a way that
even that I don't get. You don't just suddenly start charging for shit and everyone pays up.
yes, yeah,
I mean, they must have always been charging for it. They're just trying to elevate it in their accounts.
yeah.
You can't just go from. It's not a switch.
No. Well, I think one of the things that's helped them a bit on the profitability side is just cost cutting. I mean, you look at the results in previous years, and they always seem to be this company that grows massively and has thousands more employees every year. But if you cut out R&D, which they're obviously investing in a lot and have sort of ring fenced,
Yeah.
the rest of the organisation has lost loads of employees.
Yeah.
I think staff numbers are down 6,000 or 7,000, I think, last year. I mean, it's a big company. It's,
Well,
you know,
they had
it's,
to.
It's,
I mean,
talking about a company with 190,000 employees altogether. But a lot
And
of
most
those,
of them will be quite
most
high
of those are
earners as
R&D now, apparently.
Right.
Like, I think over half of the employees are counted as R&D employees.
Wow.
So if you take those out and then you look at this drop that's happened outside R&D, it's quite a big chunk of the workforce that's gone because
if you're in, like,
of cost
marketing or
cuts.
whatever.
Yeah. And they've obviously said, look, we need to keep the R&D focus because otherwise China's going to fall behind the US technologically.
Not that
and Xi
Huawei's
Jinping's gonna have a
strategy
go
is
at
in
us.
any way aligned with that of the Chinese state. We must hasten
Of course
to add.
not. And they're trying to cut in other areas. But you wonder how much that's going to hurt them, though, in a way, because they've always... I mean, maybe Europe's not as much of a consideration anymore now because they're sort of getting booted out. I mean, there was even a story today that I think Mary wrote about Telecom Italia
Tim.
turning away from them. So... I'd still think that things aren't good for them at all in that region. And then maybe they're always going to get work in China. It's not like they have to market things there.
Yes.
You just get it.
The only
and-
marketing you need to do is have a
So maybe
a
they
direct
can,
line to
maybe they can get
the
rid
main
of
man.
a huge amount of the marketing and sales function they've had simply because they're sort of
Yes.
saying, well, we don't want to
Well,
win
also,
work
I think,
in Europe
like
anymore.
my experience, like even when you remember when we went to Wuzhen, and we were being sort of looked after by a lady who worked in marketing called Nicole. That was her sort of anglicised name.
Yeah,
God knows what else. I'd love to be able to read Chinese. It's just so cool.
What's Cheryl, who we deal with?
Yeah, she's got her proper name's got X's in it.
Shubeija or something
like that.
But yeah.
Anyway, and Nicole, but then chatting to her, they sort of, they like a rotate in China. So she was in like marketing and PR then, but she'd been like a boffin before, and she was really sort of highly credentialed, and she was just happened to be in a sort of marketing and PR phase of her career.
Right.
So it's not just like, a dilettante who's just, as a graduate, and just thought, fuck it, I'll give PR a go.
The marketing people have got PhDs as well.
Yeah, exactly. But the flip side is presumably, as they obviously employ quite highly credentialed people, even for looking after idiot English journalists, their wage bill's probably quite high across the board.
Yeah.
So, that was just my guess there. And what about ZTE? So I didn't look at that.
So, they're lapping it up, basically.
They're doing all right.
They're the fastest growing vendor in the world.
Wow.
5G vendor.
And are they nearly all China?
Yeah, I mean, you have to speculate even more with ZTE because all they put out literally was the documents, the accounts. So you've got the asset, the balance sheet, the P&L statement. There was no breakdown. There was no commentary at all.
Right.
So you could see sales. I mean, there's a lot of footnotes about specific things that have happened, but there was no mention of how the carrier business has done, how the consumer business has done. This is why this has happened.
Yeah.
There was none of that at all. Certainly not that I could see.
And they've got a big fixed line thing going on as well, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened with them is, they've had their tough times because of US sanctions in 2018. They were on the entity.
All these Chinese vendors have got their sort of US war stories.
Yeah,
they sit around a campfire, go, "I've seen some shit, man."
Yeah, so it was, they were kind of the warm-up act for Huawei almost. We didn't realise that Huawei was going to end up going the same way, but it affected them a lot worse.
For different issues, but yeah.
For different issues. So this is the interesting thing to me. They were accused of, and almost owned up to it actually, because they agreed to pay fines, but they were said to have sold gear in Iran and North Korea.
So their thing is more to do with the Meng...
Yeah,
blah, blah,
very
blah.
much so. Yeah, but at the same time, the justification for having Huawei on the entity list is that it's a national security threat because the Chinese government could use its products to spy.
So why isn't ZTE?
So why isn't ZTE, which has much closer links to the Chinese military, on that list? It doesn't. It's a complete contradiction. There's no coherence.
And as you've said before, why is fixed line all right but not mobile? It's completely incoherent.
But the fact they're not on it, I think, is they obviously couldn't operate when they were on it because they were even more dependent on the US technology.
There was a time we thought they were going to go
they almost went out of
under.
business. They're really dependent on a lot of US component firms, and they don't have an equivalent, as I understand it, they don't have an equivalent of high silicon or anything like that.
No.
So they really need access to US technology. You put them on that list, it finishes them off. You take them off it, they can kind of carry on. And because they're not on it, they've been able to carry on. Now, I'm speculating, but I think one of the reasons their sales, I think, were up something like a fifth, which is quite a lot. And their profits went up a lot as well. They've done very well in China, like Huawei, on the network side. They're a lot more dependent on networks than they are on consumer and enterprise. I think networks is most of their business. It's like 3/4 or something.
I mean, they used to be a player in smartphones, but they haven't been for at least a few years.
And they've never really had the same exposure to Western markets that Huawei has. I know they've got a few deals in Europe, but they're not a big player in Europe at all. They've never really been used in the UK. You look at their deals in Europe, and the biggest customer they seem to have is the 3 Group.
Right.
Where they do work in Italy and a few other countries, but they're not a big company, so they didn't have as much to lose from this pushback against the Chinese as Huawei did. So I think they've just done very well out of continued
just
work in China,
basically,
and probably in some other markets where they've not had restrictions, like African markets. They're very big in Africa, aren't they, ZTE? And a lot of those countries have not seen a reason to ban the Chinese. So that's my speculation. But
I think that's fair enough. And just anywhere where the politics don't creep in. So, a lot of Latin America, for example, they'll do things just because America says don't.
Yeah.
I think people don't understand the deep-seated sort of cultural friction there is between Latin America and the US.
Completely.
Thanks to the war on drugs and all that sort of thing. And then you've got all of Africa. Middle East will just do what they want.
Yep. Some other Asian
places
markets
like
where they can operate.
Places like Iran, obviously, although notwithstanding all the aggro that's happened there.
But they're very good technologically. I mean, I talked to there's a guy called Arnold Van Paris who you might have interviewed or met at times. Who works for Orange. He's a top 5G guy. He's basically senior vice president.
Sounds like he should be in action films.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, but he's like basically one of their top radio people. And does a lot of press interviews as well. And I talked to him a couple of years ago about ZTE, and he was really complimentary about the quality of their products. In fact, I think Orange still uses them in Spain. So they're one of the few operators that does use ZTE in Europe to a limited extent, I think. But he said they're quality-wise, they're very, very good. They're very highly regarded.
Yeah. Well, all things being even, the Chinese will still be kicking everyone else's ass.
Yeah.
Because how they got there is another story.
Yeah.
But quality's high, after-sales service high, all that stuff. They were definitely giving Nokia and Ericsson a fucking major run for their money a few years ago. Okay, I think we've already been talking about 40 minutes, so I'm just going to just talk about the big US tech giants. I only covered them in the context. There was a Canalys set of data that came out today. They're another analyst company, and they were talking about what they call the cloud infrastructure services, which I will call, which may or may not be accurate, public cloud providers, mainly because the main people are AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud.
Yep.
And how that whole market globally grew 35% year on year, hitting $41.8 billion.
It's pretty good.
And actually, some of their commentary was like, well, coronavirus and everyone's having to digitally transform. But actually, they've got a chart that talks about the growth rate, and the growth rate, was higher. Well, obviously, growth rate's always going to be higher from a lower starting point. Yeah. But the growth rate was like 40% back in 2018, and now it's 35%. It's just been really steady, just growing like shit.
Yeah.
To this height, and then within that, AWS has 32% of it. Azure has 19%. This is all Canalys numbers, and Google Cloud has 7%, and then 42% is everyone else. So basically,
the 42, I'm guessing a lot of that is Chinese people as well.
Could be. It depends. Numbers? I didn't read their bit of methodology at how they define the market. But there was one bit where one of their analysts said it's not just a contest between the cloud service providers, but also a race with the on-premises infrastructure vendors such as Dell, HP, and Lenovo, which established competitive as-a-service offerings. And I sort of went, well, it's looking
they don't have a chance.
It's looking like public cloud's winning that race, but maybe they're in the 42%.
Yeah, I don't see any hope for anybody in that market, apart from the Chinese companies where they're in a kind of different game because they're serving China and that's big enough. It's like Huawei in 5G in China. I think I don't see anybody really being able to take on the AWSs and the Google Clouds.
No, well, so the only good news, so you and I both agree that we're sort of appalled at not just the size of them, because my right of centre free market sensibilities always tell me not to disapprove of success. Just because a company's doing really well.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to applaud enterprise, applaud hard work, applaud getting off your ass and generating wealth? But then if you do too well, go, whoa, that was too much. So ideologically, it creates paradoxes for me.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, as I've referred to Adam Smith loads of times in the past, when companies do have a monopoly or an oligopoly, then they start distorting markets, and that's our concern. One consolation is at least within this oligopoly, the other two are growing faster. So AWS grew 32% again. They like the number 32%. But Azure grew 50% and Google 56%.
Right.
So at least there's a bit of jostling for position there.
Yeah.
It's not all just AWS. It's just that every time we cover it, it seems like a telco has just gone, fuck it, AWS, you do all our stuff for us.
Yeah, and it hasn't happened that much in telco at the moment. It's coming, I think, and the big deal that we talked about before was the Dish one last week. But I think it's It's not, we don't write about what other sectors are doing in terms of the public cloud, but
No.
I think that transition's been going on in some of them for a long time. And I was on a call with Orange's CTO about a week ago, and someone, not me, and it was one of those questions that gets submitted by someone typing it in, and it just got read out by the PR people, so you couldn't tell who it was. But someone asked the question, what's your feelings about the public cloud players, and what would you give them, and what would you hold back for yourself? And he basically said, well, when he's talking about the edge specifically, we have to recognise that we can't compete against them. They're just too good. Is essentially what
and certainly when it comes to like price.
Yeah, it's like a recognition.
You could compete, but you'd be paying over the odds.
People like me are always saying, pointing out that years ago telcos had wanted to. Had real aspirations.
God, I think as recently as a year or two ago. I remember going back when we were allowed to have physical events.
And then all of a sudden, all these deals are being struck with AWS and Google Cloud, and it's like a big flow of these deals have been announced in the last year across Europe.
Thrown in the towel.
And it's just like, we can't. What can we do? They're the guys that have all the expertise. They have all the AI stuff.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and you can only swim against the tide for so long. It's just a bit sad.
Your spreadsheet, by the way, that you.
Oh yeah,
mentioned.
so I was just going to mention that. So, I was thinking about writing this stuff up during the week. I'm generally not a fan of writing up quarterlies, whether it's operators. I'll always do big vendors, but operators not so much, and big tech companies not so much. Basically, often we cover these just because there's not much going on. And we sort of fuck it, we'll do some quarterlies.
Yeah.
We all know the drill. But I'd been aware of them. I just hadn't covered them, and then this Canalys thing came up, and it gave me an excuse to just quickly collate numbers of the big five. So we've been talking about how FANG doesn't really work because no one cares about Netflix.
Yeah.
But you can't say FANG without an N because then you get in trouble. And then you've got to have Microsoft in there. So now you've got two A's, a G, an M, and an F. So there's a sort of Scrabble thing.
Yeah, Microsoft is. I never thought about that actually.
They've got to be in
FAMG,
there,
shouldn't it? Really?
Well, yeah, or sort of GAMAF.
Is that one that people use?
No, I'm just wondering. I'm just doing. Not acronyms. What's the word? Anagrams.
I think FANG's rubbish, actually.
FANG can fuck off.
Like you say, no one cares about Netflix.
Exactly. So we could have GAMAF. We can't have FAG. That's what we know we're not allowed. But we can have GAMAF. We can have
MAGAF. Sounds
MAGAF. MAGAF. Should we have MAGAF?
America great as fuck.
Yes, MAGAF. Yeah, people might get upset because they think you like Donald Trump if you say MAGAF.
What is that?
MAGA as fuck. Or something. Because MAGA was his thing, wasn't it? Make America great.
Yeah,
anyway,
of course it was. Okay.
So,
Hasn't Joe Biden just
I think the fact that will annoy people is reason enough to use it. So we're going to go for MAGAF, which is Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, of which Facebook is actually a fair bit smaller than the rest, but it's still huge.
Pierre, do you want one of these?
The what?
Jameson's.
No, I'm good.
No. Right, you just sort yourself out, mate. There's not that much left anyway. And I collated it all. Amazon brought in just Q1 brought in over $100 billion in revenue.
That's pretty good.
But they don't have much margin because most of it is just you buying pointless shite off Amazon, of which they presumably make, I don't know, a single figure percent.
Groceries and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Or
T-shirts,
whatever cack it is that everyone buys. I still end up managing to spend hundreds of pounds on the goddamn site every month.
Yeah.
And so their margin's only 7%. But then within that, you've got AWS. If it wasn't for AWS, their margin would probably be like about 2%.
Right.
Because AWS margin's great. And then you got Apple. They brought in nearly 90 billion. And by the way, the key thing from this is actually a change. So Amazon's revenues, this is Q1 and there's year-on-year change, so versus Q1 2020. 44% up for Amazon, 54% up for Apple, 34% up for Google, only 19% up for Microsoft, and 48% up for Facebook.
Wow, Facebook did well.
I know.
So all the pressure it's under, and it's still.
And what? But
so
check out.
So this is interesting though. This the whole sort of let's not advertise on Facebook anymore thing that happened last year, when everybody said let's boycott it because of its.
Yeah, well, they did all right.
That's obviously not really had an impact then.
They did all right. I mean, their revenues are like much lower. They're 26 billion compared to obviously Amazon over 100, even Microsoft's 41. But look at their profit. So the profit changes are interesting ones. So Microsoft's profit change, 15.5 billion, was up 44%. They're the shittest. Their profits up 40%. They're the shittest of this lot. Then you got Facebook, whose profits are up 94%. Then you got Apple, whose profits are up 110%. You got Google, whose profits up 163%, and Amazon's profits up with 224%.
See,
and that's because of AWS.
The issue I have with it is, like you were saying, it's not that you don't want people to succeed, but when you see such a small number of companies reporting these outrageous growth rates, and everybody else is there sort of limping along.
Yes, I know.
You know, like crawling towards.
And we've just got through a once in a generation catastrophe.
Yeah, you sort of think,
which made me feel shit all of yesterday.
Going on that's kind of getting worse. So.
Yes, well, exactly, and I'm being honest. It leaves me with a conundrum because fair play to them. I mean, they've largely done it on merit. There might have been a little bit of sort of, you know, like I think Facebook's always getting done for sort of predatory M&A.
Well, I think it's merit at first, and then it becomes network effects, doesn't it?
Yes, and a bit of predatory M&A. So we all know Facebook bought WhatsApp and Instagram, but everyone let them do it.
Yeah.
I wonder what the new iOS update is going to do to the numbers.
Yeah, so the iOS update is to do with like privacy and how it's going to enable sort of targeted marketing companies like Facebook and Google to sell their main product, isn't it?
No, the phone now is going to ask you, do you want to be targeted across all apps?
So there's an opt-out rather than...
You'll be able to say
auto,
no.
Yeah, so it's easier to opt out, basically.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That's why Facebook was quite pissed.
They were. And apparently there's been lots of stuff in US press, like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, about how Zuckerberg and Tim Cook don't exactly see eye to eye.
No, I've heard that as well.
But none of these CEOs look like people you just go out to the pub with, if I'm honest.
I'd like to think they meet somewhere in a cabin and they thumb wrestle.
I don't think they're the sort of people who go out to the pub, are they?
At all.
They get up at 4:30.
Zuckerberg looks like he doesn't go out ever.
Go for a 7-mile run. Come back, work 15 hours.
Yeah.
They're not. They're a different breed.
They are a different breed. So yes. Anyway, so we better move it on because we've done like nearly the whole pod and we've only done one subject. How long have we done, Pierre?
51 minutes.
51 minutes. Yeah. Jesus Christ. All right, better keep the other two short. I know. I did that usual thing of not looking at when we started again. But yes, it was about 2:30, wasn't it? All right. So let's move it on.
Content you were going to talk about?
Yes. So telecoms companies buying content. So the thing that's catalysing this is BT's looking to flog BT Sport. That's the main part of the story. And BT Sport, I mean, I remember writing about this when they were doing it. And yeah, football's very expensive. You know, we had all this silliness over this Super League or whatever. But the reason that happened is because they thought, well, hold on a sec, there's a lot of wedge here and too much of it's going to UEFA or whatever.
Yeah.
Sort of corrupt governing bodies are running it. How about we trouser the fucking lot?
Yeah.
Which from their point of view, you can see it. And then everyone got very moral as, oh, greed. Oh, no. What, greed in football? Never.
Yeah.
And obviously, ever since the Premier League's been going, it's been a ridiculous amount of money. You know, how much it cost? Do you ever go to, not Highbury, whatever it's called, Emirates? Do you ever go to Emirates?
I've been, yeah, but usually on the cheap games, which were like 20, 25, but
right,
normally
it's like cup games or something.
Yeah.
Normally, what's a normal league game?
Yeah, £100. Yeah,
100 quid. So 100 quid to get into Arsenal. I'm sure it's the same for Spurs, which is my team. Buying a top costs about another 100 quid. You know, and so if you're going to be like a dad doing the whole cliche, getting your kid into football, that's costing you. But their real money is through the telly. And that's where it's relevant to this BT. You know, they got a piece of that. They didn't buy that many games, probably about 10% of the games, something like that. Do you reckon?
But spent a huge amount.
Yeah, a bit more. I'd say 20% of the Premier League ones. Yeah.
Well, they're spending. I talked to Paolo Pescatore about it, and
this is his wheelhouse. I mean, I know he talks about a bunch of stuff.
I know, but he really knows
media
the
and telecoms.
Yeah, and I got on the phone with him, and he was, he's very insightful about it. I mean, he reckons they're spending. Actually, it's in their reports anyway. They are spending up to about $1 billion a year on rights.
Right.
It's not just. It's not. It's obviously not just the Premier League. It's across all the things, and then there's rights for some other sports as well. But it's
Champions League is probably the most expensive.
Yeah, and then you've got but it's not just that. Then you've got studio costs, and all the production that they incur.
Talent, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money to invest, basically, to have this
like
business.
us. I mean, how much does this studio with us in it? Well, that costs a lot of fucking money right now.
And it's not really paid off for
Gotta
them.
put a price on it.
It's not really paid off for
No,
them.
and so that's the interesting thing. It isn't just that news in itself. So I want to ask you, what do you think about the original rationale of telecoms getting into content? Were you ever sort of convinced by it?
Not really, because it's not something they've ever done very well. I think that culturally, it's just not a core competence. And content companies, it's like the AT&T is the big one, isn't it? The AT&T takeover of Time Warner, which is now Warner.
But that's so
Warner
big,
Media.
they've got to follow through on that, even if they just become a media company
or anything.
Yeah.
But they're culturally very, very different things, and the kind of people that are good at running content businesses aren't the kind of people that are good at running.
But what about the presumed synergy? So the reason they did it. So the other story that came out this week, again, this was a sort of rumor. I don't think it's necessarily been substantiated that much. That Verizon was looking to offload its thing. So a few years ago, it went and bought AOL and bought Yahoo, which I just thought was hilarious at the time because they're like 90s internet brands.
Yeah.
Granted, they had some newer shit, like AOL had bought some other media brands like TechCrunch and Huffington Post and that sort of thing, and Yahoo had some stuff going on, I don't know, something that some Americans need to consume that Yahoo makes. But it's always hard for me to find out what. And anyone who insists on putting an exclamation mark in their fucking company name, that they've made an instant enemy with me. I certainly won't ever write it, that's for sure. Just like which. I won't write the question mark on which either. I'm not having it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, but I was just like, and they were like, oh, there's advertising and there's network effects and we've got this audience and that audience and then there's a Venn diagram. And you sort of thought, well, yeah, all right. But I was just never convinced.
Well, I wasn't either, and I don't see what the synergies are. I mean, maybe there is some on the advertising side, but I don't see, unless you have a walled garden, which is deeply unpopular these days, might even infringe net neutrality rules.
Right.
It's not what people do. The internet and over-the-top players have basically completely blown that whole model apart. You don't gain any benefits from owning a website or a particular bit of content unless you're restricting that to customers that come to you. Yeah. Anybody can go to AOL.
It's sort of an old school sort of bundling concept, isn't it?
It's funny. You just mentioned the culture and what you just said now. It's kind of a good segue with the Super League you were just talking about, because the owners looked at this on paper and they're like, that makes perfect sense, let's do this, but they hadn't considered the culture and the fans
and the
enormous
world.
Backlash.
Yeah. It was just obviously made in a sort of mahogany panelled boardroom.
Yeah, it's like business guys are like, yeah, this is good business.
Made it on some island that one of them owned in the Caribbean. Go, yeah, that'll work. I was just chatting to the lad who cleans the bogs. He seemed up for it. That'll do me as a straw poll. So yes, they haven't got a clue.
But it's not. I mean, just going back to BT specifically, it's quite interesting. If you look at their, you might have thought, okay, they own a bit of the Premier League and they've got some Champions League rights and they've got this TV content.
They got these Champions League rights.
Right, there you are. This is really going to work out for them well in terms of driving consumers to their services and in terms of what people are spending on their accounts. And it's never really been that obvious. If you look at I think they started off providing a lot of the stuff free on the TV side generally and then started charging for it. Well, but if you look at their broadband ARPU, and this was pointed out to me by another analyst, Kester Mann, who we sometimes deal with, is at CCS Insight, it's gone down actually at BT in the last couple of years.
Which is the ultimate...
that's
the ultimate gauge, because I mean that was supposed to be the point. You button it. It's supposed to create stickiness. It's supposed to
boost spending.
Yeah, and like Pierre was just saying, he's a BT broadband subscriber, and the sport is a sort of big part of that for you.
I forgot about the UFC as well. That's on BT as well.
I mean,
that's true. Yeah, you get a bit
the
of
only
UFC.
thing I can think is that maybe they'd have done worse if they didn't have the TV and the sports. Maybe they wouldn't have had as many broadband customers.
But maybe Pierre's not a typical BT subscriber. Maybe most people don't give a toss. Like when I had BT. So my broadband's now EE, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Which is they're still a different brand from BT.
I find it bizarre that you get people phoning up saying, do you want to be broadband when you're on BT?
But it's better. I've got a better deal than I ever got from BT, so it's really perverse. But when I had BT, I had the sport and I just never used it. I don't know if it was a product of like the age of my family, my kids are a bit older. You presumably get a bit of Pierre time every now and then where you just get to watch sport. I just never felt that I got access to the living room telly.
Yeah.
So even if I wanted to watch the football on BT when I had it,
well, the other
never
thing
actually
is
used it.
because it's only, it's only what 10% of Premier League matches. It's quite.
It's like 20%. It's a game at least every weekend.
Okay,
sometimes more.
there is a game a weekend then.
And
okay.
then it's.
But you got to be more into football now. I mean, would you watch like two teams you didn't give a shit about? Are you that interested in football that you?
Well,
would?
I mean, I this week I watched last night, the night before, all three, the two Champions League games and the Europa League. Yeah.
So you're just more into
Because
football
they were big games,
That's fine, but you're just more into football now. That's cool. Yeah, I wouldn't have watched it unless it was Spurs or something.
No, sometimes on the weekends it's like Wolves
in.
against whatever. And I'm not watching that.
Sheffield.
Yeah, I'm not watching that.
But for a company spending this much money on rights, $1 billion a year, and all the studio costs and all the production costs, there's not been.
No.
I don't think we could say there's been a good return on investment on what they've done. And the trouble at the moment is that their priorities just lie elsewhere. I mean, they're not doing particularly well, BT. They've arguably been hit harder by coronavirus than a lot of other operators. Their revenues are down quite a lot last year, and profits, relatively speaking. I mean, some companies have obviously done much worse, hospitality and all that lot, but they didn't do particularly well. They got this huge investment program to build fibre to 20 million homes by the mid-2020s, which is going to cost them 12 billion. They've got a 5G rollout going on, and they're looking at trying to do something with this PT Sport business to take it to the next level. Knowing that they've got all these competitors coming along from like people at Amazon and Disney. What could they possibly do themselves? It's not a surprise that they've gone, we need a partner, we need to sell some of this, if not the whole thing.
Going back to the football rights, it's not like the British teams haven't done well as well in the Champions League. Like if you're a fan of Liverpool, any of the 4 teams that qualify for the Champions League here, if you want to watch the Champions League, that's the only way. You have to get BT Sport.
Yeah.
And then they like 2 years ago, there were 2 British teams in the final.
Well,
there's 2 still right now. Usually, you'd think the fans would eventually sign up to BT to watch it.
No, Paolo made the interesting point that he thinks the whole business model needs looking at and is kind of cracking open. And this ESL thing has actually been a bit of a wake-up call for where things go from now. I mean, you were saying how ridiculous it is that people are talking about greed in football all of a sudden. But
good.
Maybe
I'm pleased Paolo says that, because
I thought as long as you don't touch
the ESL thing, he was saying it's quite interesting because if you look at what's happened with sports rights, they've gone up from, I think before Gavin Patterson, who was the BT boss who really sort of led this charge into sport, the year before he took over, Premier League rights alone over a 3-year period were about $1 billion. They've gone up to 5.1 billion last time round. And the companies aren't making much money who are going into this. BT's not made much money from going into this. The other problem that Paolo made, which I thought was really interesting, is this sort of fragmentation you're seeing, which isn't good for consumers at all. You have to go and get a BT account to watch some matches.
Yeah, like Pierre's an Arsenal fan. He can't be sure where he's going to watch the latest Arsenal game.
You might have to. So you've got to get Sky, you've got to get BT. What if Disney comes along with something and bids for some rights? Then all of a sudden you've got to get Disney as well. It just doesn't work very well. The whole
and then you've got all the
for
players
consumers.
Dressed up as fairies and stuff.
I'd pay to see that.
Fairies versus goblins or something.
Like musicals, football.
7 dwarves.
But it's. I just think it hasn't worked. I mean, maybe there are examples of operators that have had more success with this model. I don't know elsewhere in Europe, but I'm not aware of them if there are. I don't know any telco that's gone into sports that's really made, or even TV.
Or just content at all. So there's the Verizon thing. So
content rather,
yeah, just content. I just, as someone who, as a telco journalist, you sort of feel that you straddle the content and the telecoms world.
Do you know what I think it is? It's just they like the idea of being in that market because it's sexy.
I think they like it.
It's
but something else.
Yeah.
But I think the rationale is, I think that a big part of the rationale is this constant, perfectly justifiable fear of commoditization, of being a utility. It's like, here we are, we're just a fucking dumb pipe.
Let's put something through the pipe.
Yeah, there we are.
Exactly.
Let's have some control of that. It's like a water company owning the water as well.
But the trouble is everybody else can get that as well, unless you restrict that to yourself, which you can do with sport, but then you have this fragmentation happening where someone has to have several accounts. the OTT players are blowing this model apart.
Yeah,
you come along, you get a BT broadband
definitely swimming
and you
against
pay
the current.
£5 a month, and you get Amazon on top of it, and Netflix and Disney, and you're paying £15 for all.
Well, that
It's a
also
bit more than
sort
that,
of,
I know, but
it sort of goes back to our previous thing about the big tech giants and about what's scary and market distorting about how big they are. Is Amazon's into sports content. They got all the tennis and all that sort
it's
of thing.
one of the reasons I have Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and the coverage is great, and they don't fuck around. They just show you the games.
And the 1-day delivery for free. It's pretty great too.
I have to say they've done such a good job of it.
No, they have, but they've also got tons of money.
The app is awful. Everyone
They've also got
agrees.
tons of money. How can BT compete with Amazon?
Yeah, no. Well, look at the size of the businesses as well.
Amazon just go, all right, we'll buy football. With this cash we just found down the back of the Amazon sofa. So,
spare change.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That just fell out of
and
Bezos's
they can
pocket.
just get things sorted out, it seems, so much more quickly. I mean, you were saying the app's awful, and maybe it isn't as good as Netflix or Disney, but actually, I go to Amazon on the TV, I can find sport quickly. You go down there, Rafael Nadal plays a match, and you miss it, and half an hour later it's there, replay. Click on it, you can watch the whole thing.
That's pretty good.
Because I've heard Amazon's quite good at cloud. So they can store it all on their own.
Yeah, Amazon, they just bought Whole Foods like it was nothing, as a pet project.
Yeah, just so that they could...
Maybe it was a misunderstanding, like Jeff Bezos asked for something from Whole Foods. And they're like, oh, sorry, I thought you meant buy the company.
And you go, don't worry about it, mate.
It's fine.
Just a couple of bills.
How much was it?
A couple of bills. What's that between mates?
Put on my tab.
Well, quite. So yes, there's a certain... And we're going to keep talking about this because there's a certain market... When you get to a certain size... This is kind of going back to the old thing that I was trying to move on with, but, as I'm meandering... The fact about... This is kind of how I reconcile my doctrinal free marketism with the need to keep an eye on these people. It's because you get to a certain size and there's like a gravity. It's like a black hole. There's just an intrinsically distorting quality to just your size.
Yeah.
You do anything at all, it's going to distort markets all around it like a black hole. Yeah. Because you just can't help it because no one can compete. You can just chuck money at it.
We also start seeing like conflicts of interest, like NBC owns NBC broadcasts the Oscars, for example. And NBC obviously is the same company as Disney. And so then there was this whole thing about like the Oscars starting to push Disney movies and stuff. Yeah. People were like, why are these Disney actors coming to talk even though there's no Disney movie nominated?
But I think one of the problems with BT's, and this gets to your point about you can't compete with them, BT's sports service is a part of its TV service, and apart from sport, it's pretty thin, there's not a lot that they have, actually, that you'd want to sign up for. No. Certainly not compared to going to Disney or Netflix or Amazon or all these offerings where you can get almost anything you want, really, at the moment.
And whenever you want, like yesterday when I was really feeling it with this vaccine, like after I'd just about got some Nokia quarterlies out of my system, I sort of slunk into bed in the spare room, lobbed on Netflix and watched about 4 episodes of IT Crowd because that's about all I felt capable of doing. I think I nodded off while I was doing it. So yes, to draw a line under that and move on, I'm not surprised to see them pulling out of it. Not just because of the market forces we're talking about now, but I think the strategy was a bit shit to start with. The remaining one is AT&T because they're the ones who've bet so much bigger. I know BT spent a lot on football rights, and I know Verizon spent a bit on M&A of Yahoo and AOL, but none of that comes close to what AT&T spent on Time Warner.
Do you know how much BT Sport is per month here for the app?
No.
£11 a month.
Is it? So
they used to be 7, and they went from 7 to 11.
And they want you to pay more for that than you do for Netflix.
Exactly.
Or for Amazon.
Yeah, true.
Amazon, where you get all your groceries,
with
no charges.
Have to pay for the groceries, to be fair.
Yeah, but free delivery.
Yeah.
And all the content they've got, all the tennis, It's
and also
£6, £7 or something at the moment.
BT Sports used to have all of the UFC. Now the really, really big fights, you have to pay extra on top to watch it live.
Yeah, it's just not going to work.
So this is the problem.
And you could buy if I wanted to, I could also just subscribe to the UFC app, and that will give me everything.
Yes.
I was going to say, the problem is here I am sort of saying how wonderful Amazon is, and that's the issue, isn't it? That we realise these companies are too powerful.
Well,
I'm hooked myself.
That's what we've chatted about. Well, it's going to be even worse for me because certainly sometime in May, I'm going to publish my book on Kindle Direct Publishing.
Shameless plug.
And then
Shameless plug.
Then you really are a slave to the Amazon.
Identity Crisis, look out for it.
Is that what it's called?
Identity Crisis,
okay.
yeah. And, you know, and one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I don't like the thought. Yeah, it remains to be seen whether anyone thinks a book's any fucking good. But I just don't like the thought. The way publishing works, you know, is they take most of your cash. The way things are going now, people can just trash your book if it becomes controversial, if it becomes a little bit...
But if you get sued, they'll help.
I don't know. I'm just not sure what they do. They just seem quite parasitic. Whereas KDP, you can get like 70%, you know, let's say you stick it up on Amazon for £5, you get 70% of that, £3.50. Whereas I think going through the publishing route, you end up with like 10% or something in your pocket.
Sounds about right. I used to work in book publishing.
Oh, okay.
That sounds about right.
Right, that sounds about right. Yeah, well, after all the, you know, and then you've got agents
That was
and various
21
other,
years ago, but...
various other middlemen. But then I am selling my soul to Amazon. If Amazon decides that they don't like what's in my book, what the fuck can I do about it?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. I mean, I'd welcome the chance for it to be so contentious that Amazon felt it had to do something about it. Let's
we'll start trending.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on. We've done like over an hour already, haven't we?
Yeah.
Space. We'll make it quite quick on space because there isn't that much to say.
I watched an interesting space movie last night.
What was that?
Stowaway.
Yeah.
Pierre and I were just talking about it before you came in.
I haven't heard of that.
It's a new Netflix film.
Would you recommend it? Is it like a Netflix original? Is it?
Yeah, but it's reasonably good. Got Tony
Netflix
Collette
is
in it,
releasing
you know
one
her.
new movie
I like Tony
every
Collette.
week.
Yeah, I think it's very well acted.
Muriel's
and
Wedding's
quite
a fucking great film.
There's a moral conundrum in it that they have to address. It's not sort of an action-packed film. It's quite slow.
We watched a series that wasn't bad. I think it was on Amazon. Going back to the central theme, innit? It was on one of them.
The Overlord.
It's on one of the MAGAFs. No. Called 000.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
good.
we talked about this already. Yeah.
We've done this, have we?
Check that
Okay.
one out.
All right, then let me get back to space.
I thought it wasn't on Amazon here.
Yeah, well, maybe it was on Now TV.
Yeah, it was on.
That was it. But they were talking about
don't have
it
that
being
one.
on Amazon.
It's on
Joe
Amazon in
Rogan.
the US.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
TV Sky's one, yeah. Sky's
That's right.
So wait,
I
it's
subscribe to that as well. I probably chuck about 20 or 30 quid a month into
TV.
the sort of what they call it. God, it's gone. I'm going senile. The video on demand.
Oh.
SVOD. There we go.
running with the space subject. I looked at the Starlink prices. It's $100 a month, but you have to fork $500, sorry, upfront for the kit, the dish.
Okay, Starlink. Okay, thank you for
It is
getting
an
me back on
investment.
track. What a good producer Pierre is. So,
It's not cheap,
so
and
two
you get about
stories.
80 meg down. It's pretty good
That is good, yeah. That's
in the middle of nowhere.
it's more than I get from BT.
It's not for poor people in Africa, you know. So
No, but it might be. I mean,
eventually, maybe.
And you never know what the strategic considerations are of these people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. They might decide it's worth chucking 10 billion at appearing philanthropic,
But also-
because it helps them in other areas.
I'm thinking like these things will be good in countries that are oppressed, you know, like where they regulate the internet. But then,
Yeah.
how do you get that dish in the country?
But
in
you
the first
still
place?
need you
What
still
if
need your
get caught?
ground
Do you
infrastructure.
know what I mean?
And then
There'll be
how do you
people-
hide the dish? You know,
There'll be people driving
Yeah.
around going, "What's that dish doing?"
Yeah, like are you
Yeah.
in Venezuela? This would never be allowed in Venezuela, or
No,
in
no.
some countries in Africa. No way.
So, so two stories I wrote. I wrote a headline that said, "UTEL SAT chucks $550 million into the OneWeb bottomless pit." OneWeb is a company that went bankrupt 2 years ago, and they're into a thing called low Earth orbit (LEO) satellites, which is what the Elon Musk company Starlink, SpaceX, does. And SpaceX is actually the first mover.
Yeah,
And they've already got about 1,000 of these little dudes up there.
but it's such like a mundane thing for them. I didn't realize. Like, oh yeah, we launch like every week they launch a bunch.
60 or
It's like
whatever.
a
yeah, just lob them up there.
yeah.
And low Earth orbit means less than 2,000 kilometers, I think. So these are huge distances, but obviously space is pretty fucking huge.
It's
Apparently.
infinite.
Apparently it's big.
So in that context, they're not so huge. But I think like geostationary, like the old satellites from the 80s, they're like hundreds of kilometers up. So these are nowhere near them. But low Earth orbit. Anyway, it's become a bit of a thing. So OneWeb is an interesting one. One of the reasons they're interesting to us as English people is, or British, I should say, is that our government bailed them out. We like bailing out failing companies. That's
We do nowadays.
This was about 2 years ago. Oh yeah, it was the start of the pandemic because they just seem to always need more money.
Aren't there some Indian investors involved?
Yeah, so it was the British government and it was Tata, something like that. Or
Bharti?
Yeah, that's true. Sorry,
it's
India.
one of the two. Yeah.
Sorry, India. I'm confusing your big
Reliance.
tech company. I think I've probably written it somewhere. Bharti Global. There we are. Got there, not Tata. Before the Tata people write in. And SoftBank got involved before they went bankrupt, and they got involved again because SoftBank, he doesn't give a shit. He just chuck money at everything.
Yeah.
Except me.
If you make enough bets, a couple of them will work out.
Yeah.
This is basically
he's just a complete gambler.
Yeah.
He's the sort of person who goes to Vegas and just puts a mill on red. Just fuck it, doesn't even look. And then the story was that Eutelsat, which is I think a French satellite company, decided to chuck $500 million into the pot.
Isn't it? Yeah. Is it sort of a pan-European thing, Eutelsat, or?
Yeah, I think it's
mixed up with
HQ'd
other
in
stuff.
France.
Right.
But yeah, it probably is pan-European. Everything's got to
But
be
my point,
pan-European.
like Ian was saying, sorry to interrupt. Who's the end customer on this for this?
Of all these LEO things? Well,
No, OneWeb in particular.
Well, but that's a good point because I was looking. I'm going to lead up to this actually because there's a reason I started looking into it, which is I wrote a headline that said Eutelsat chucks 550 million into the OneWeb bottomless pit. It's a typical Scott sort of slightly arsey headline, but I didn't just make it up. It's called bottomless pit because the only time I ever write about OneWeb seems to be with them just getting another $500 million off someone.
Yeah.
It just seems to be a bottomless pit. Anyway, and then someone commented and they said, really? What a dumb headline. It is very far from, quote, a bottomless pit. OneWeb is heading to be a fully funded equity and no debt global operator by mid-22. What went before has gone, making OneWeb under its new owners and management the best LEO economics in the market. I thought that sounds a bit propaganda-y.
It sounds like somebody who works there.
Who was this person?
It's
then?
called Chris McLaughlin. McLaughlin? Something like that. And then I went and Googled him, and turns out he's their main FLAC. He's their main comms
Right.
guy.
Okay.
Could have put a different name.
Well, no, but fair play to him. I mean, his email address was at oneweb.com.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Anyway, and so I just answered. So he'd given us that sort of canned, that boilerplate, we're going to be great. And I just said, is that what you were saying before you went bankrupt? And he hasn't responded. And I just thought, it's a bit of a glib thing. I'm sure there's lots of reasons why it's a different situation. I think what I was really just trying to point out to him is like, look, if you want to get cute, don't do it in the fucking comment section.
I just don't understand what OneWeb's supposed to be. Who it's supposed to be serving?
Well, yes. So so that's what I was leading up to. So looking into this, before I gave him a bit of lip on the comments, I thought, let's find out who this Chris McLaughlin is. And he'd gone on a BBC thing with Evan Davis talking about the satellite industry, and he'd been lobbying or communicating quite a lot about the whole thing. And he was saying that we're mainly like a B2B, like for businesses and all that sort of thing. So we all assumed that LEO was basically connecting the unconnected. That Google Loon or whatever.
Yeah.
Just all these people who can't get fixed line.
Yeah, and I understand Google Loon and Facebook Aquila or whatever it is.
All that
I've got
stuff.
it mixed up probably, but I can understand why those companies
So
want unconnected
I thought it was
people
in that
connected.
general mix, and maybe it is.
Yeah, but it's British.
But it happens to be British, although to the extent which it's British is diminishing
so is
by
it
the day.
people who still wear kilts and say we want our freedom?
Yeah. Sort of like a smart distillery or something. But yeah, I mean, he didn't go into detail on this thing I listened to, but he was talking about like a more B2B thing.
Right.
And I'm just trying to imagine, we've got all this industry 4.0.
Businesses in the Highlands.
Whatever point we're at with industry. No, he didn't specify the Highlands.
Those businesses in the Highlands definitely need satellite connectivity, though. I could see there's a need for
sort
that.
of goat farming or something. But yeah, I don't know. That I can sort of, this is a sort of limit of our own imagination, but I can imagine there are times where having absolutely seamless, geographically unconstrained connectivity would be a useful thing. Not having to hand over from one cell to another. IoT, we know there's not much money in IoT, but obviously a big thing with IoT is crossing borders. You can't be dealing with shit like roaming with IoT, can you?
No. See, I can see a need for satellite maybe in a market like India, perhaps, in some instances, where they don't have fixed line infrastructure.
I bet there's loads of massive cities that have bugger all infrastructure there.
Yeah, and maybe even outside the cities where you have, a growing middle class, don't you, in India? It's a bit like China, the middle class getting bigger. They don't have the fixed line infrastructure. If you can do it, if you can put these satellites up there and your costs per home passed or whatever, however it's measured in that instance, is lower than digging up streets and putting fibre lines down, and then you can provide a really competitive service as well. Okay, I get it, but that never really worked out for satellite in the past.
No. It's like we're happy it's there, that thing, but we're not sure what it's for.
So there's two things about LEO versus normal. So there's LEO, MEO, and GEO or something like that, which is just like concentric layers of an onion further away from the surface of the Earth. The thing about LEO, there's a couple of advantages. I mean, the biggest one that I got from day one was latency.
Ping, yeah.
Yeah. So we know that there's just the speed of light. So physical distance has an effect, and LEO is a hell of a lot closer. So the amount of time it takes for a signal to go up to the satellite and back down again is a lot less than it is to go up to a great big old 80s geostationary thing. And there's thousands of these things all swarming around the place.
Yeah. Creating a lot of space debris.
Well, yeah. So I'm going to lead up. That's the other thing. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing I learned from looking into this guy Chris, who's trolling me on the comments. OneWeb. So there was the other story I wrote is that SpaceX gets approval to lower its LEO. So it was applying to the FCC, the American Telecoms regulator. It had a license to send a shitload of satellites up to about 1,000 kilometers, and it wanted them to send up more like 500 kilometers because that's where all its ones are. And apparently, if you're clever like Elon Musk, you want them all together so they can all buzz around like little fucking satellite insects, all chatting to each other. And everyone else, OneWeb included, including this lad Chris, who was hassling me on the comments, we're just going, nah, you can't let that happen. That's bullshit. It'll all end in tears. And there was a thing about a week ago where they claimed that a OneWeb satellite and a SpaceX satellite nearly crashed into each other.
Right.
And the thing is, the only way, if you think about the physics of orbit, they don't just sit there. They've got to be whizzing round.
Yeah.
Because the centrifugal force has to counter the gravitational force.
Yep.
So there's a certain precise speed they have to go at in order to stay at a certain altitude.
And then you got the movie Gravity, the disaster.
Right, I've never seen that.
Yeah.
That covers all
that.
Well,
that's basically the consequence of OneWeb.
Is it?
The consequences of OneWeb for Sandra Bullock.
Chris McLaughlin was involved in making that film.
No, he'd have been opposed to it. So this is bad. This is bad PR for OneWeb.
Right, there we are. I might have to write a shitty comment on their story. So these things are buzzing around. And obviously, if there is any aggro, it's looking like it's a bit congested there. And if they start smashing into each other, obviously there's the worry about stuff raining down on us.
Well,
but they can all start taking chunks out of each other.
And the debris hit another thing, another
exactly.
thing.
It's all just whizzing around. The debris doesn't just sit there; it's whizzing around.
Yeah.
So they were lobbying against this, and the FCC has decided, nah, you're all talking shit. Go ahead, Elon. Send them down to 500 kilometres instead of 1,000 kilometres.
So his Starlink thing.
Yeah.
What's that all about then?
That's the same thing.
But who's he trying to serve?
I don't know the precise business model. Another comment, actually.
Should give him a call.
I might get him on the phone after this podcast, actually. And
get Elon.
Should we see if he wants to come on?
If he's not on Joe Rogan skinning up.
If he's not on Joe Rogan, he might want to come on the Telecoms.com podcast.
It's directly equivalent in terms of reach. So Yes. So I mean, all your comments are good. All your questions are good, and I don't have the answer what the business model is for LEO, but people are chucking billions of dollars at it.
Well, they're obviously seeing something, and presumably
Yeah.
the people chucking billions aren't stupid people. Some of them.
But it's not
so-
obvious, is it?
No, it isn't
Because
obvious to me.
It's
the reason.
Because satellite didn't work. I got into telecoms originally during the satellite heyday. Actually,
Right.
I worked for a consulting company called Analysis, and all their
Analysis
big
Mason.
projects when I first joined, back when I was even younger than Pierre is now, were
Wow.
all satellite projects for companies like Iridium and Teledesic, and they had plans. And this was before the days when we had mobile data on terrestrial networks.
Oh, this was
So-
like in the
so the-
60s, yeah?
So the business model made sense then to a certain extent, because the plan was to put the satellites up and provide internet connectivity for people on laptops and even phones and stuff. And you thought, oh yeah, okay. But then terrestrial came along and sort of destroyed the arrangements, the plan.
It feels like people have been trying to get
and they're
money out of
trying
satellites
to get
forever.
on, and I can see it with marine. I can see it with remote, disaster relief. I can see it in remote areas, but it's very niche.
For the army.
I just don't. The
Yeah.
army. I just don't get
Military
it
on the whole.
in a kind of mass market
No,
context at
so-
all. With
Oh,
the
we're talking
improving
about-
capability of fibre, the improving capability of 5G, I don't get what use satellite is.
We were talking about this before the podcast, and I was telling Ian, there's probably like rich people who have ranches in the middle of nowhere. They'll be able to afford it.
Yeah, and that's all fine. So we're trying to work out, is there a mass market thing or is it a B2B thing? But so OneWeb had got through about 3 billion before it went bankrupt. Now it needs about another 2 billion to get up to this place that this lad was talking
and why
about.
why is the British government so keen to keep this thing afloat?
Well, that's another good question, to which I don't have the answer. That's the classic thing. That's a good question. Is a way of saying I don't know.
Maybe the British
answer.
government wants to cut all the pipes, like completely cut itself from the world.
I mean, do you know what it comes back to? Is what we've chatted about a lot on this pod, is that telecoms has become an increasingly, I know, I'm going to wrap it up, become an increasingly political thing. It's strategic.
Yeah.
And so, especially under the Trump regime with all the talking about Huawei. I was listening to a bloke, there's a Spectator podcast, and they got a former MI6 head called Richard Dearlove or something like that. And he was giving it large. To be honest, I found him quite unconvincing. But he was just saying, I can't believe Boris Johnson was even going to let Huawei anywhere fucking near our networks. And I was like, well, hold on. It wasn't a problem in 4G.
Yeah.
But he was making it out to be this black and white thing about how even having a Chinese takeaway near the telecoms network is some kind of
All of a
security
sudden with
threat.
5G, but not with 4G.
Yeah, and it was just too absolutist, and he just came over as a very political.
I mean, look, a lot of the things you can do with 4G, you can do with 5G. It's not that radical
Well, quite.
a break. So
And yet no one was freaking out about it
So the
before.
question for him then would have been, well, either you drop the ball,
Yeah.
or you
when
talk-
did it become bad?
Yeah,
Richard
exactly.
Dearlove?
Because it was allowed to build a very big position in the UK market.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, we're
No, but so the fact is strategic. So this was sort of what to answer. Why did the UK government get involved with OneWeb? Maybe they just thought this is a way of seizing back a little bit of strategic
just so we
control
have
of these
Yeah,
things.
we have this now.
Just so we're involved.
Yeah, for the future.
So yeah, we better wrap it up there because we've gone longer than even we normally do. So
We got the longest one ever.
longest one ever. I know, it was all good fun though.
Yeah,
Quality.
Quality.
All right. Thanks a lot for bearing with us, and make sure you join us for the next one.